Hello everyone, this is Bradley. Long story short, in the past I've using 3.0 alpha to do that knitting animation. It's just kind of a test to test the performance and workflow, other things. And many people requested tutorials from me. And later there comes the debate about how 3.0 geometry nodes should go. There are many different proposals, the links provided in the description. And just shortly before I recorded this video, there's a kind of decision that's one of prototype which I personally like gets to be selected, but it's still a prototype, so many things hasn't been decided. It's not in master yet, I guess. So I don't know if I should do a tutorial or not, because either way I think this video will be outdated, so it must make no sense that if I do these tutorials in 3.0 alpha, but instead I'm going to do this with the field prototype. But I still think this video will just be outdated as things get more improved or changed. Again, this is just a prototype, so take it easy. But anyway, I think the whole point of the entire change is to make a better workflow. The principle, the approach that you take to make a particular animation, the process, essentially does not really change. So if you watch this tutorial, maybe it will be helpful help you in the future. The reason this animation can only be done in 3.0 is because the geometry nodes only start to support curve objects, or the spline or curve, whatever, starting in 3.0 alpha. So technically speaking, you cannot really do this in 2.93. So let's start. So here I started with a vertices and I modeled this object. Just to tell you a little bit how to model this. Like if you have the add-on, which is called the extra mesh, this is a built-in add-on in Blender, so you do not need to download anything, you just enable that, so you just be fine. And then you add a single vertices. With a single vertices, there is a very important trick. So you hold Control and Shift and right click, so you automatically extruding the points where your mouse is in. So you model that very correctly, but obviously you need to tweak it a little bit, but this is up to you. So the principle of all knitting animation started with a single unit, and then you instance that on a grid or honeycomb mesh. Here I started with a vertices to model because I don't want to deal with the bezel curve, and then I'm going to start to subdivide that. Once we subdivide that, which creates a lot of points, we will deal with this later. I think this is too wide, so let's scale that down. Get something like this. I think you would be fine. Just I'm not going to deal with too much modeling in this tutorial because I don't even know how to model that great. Okay, once you get this unit like this, I'm going to just rename it as knitting unit. And I'm going to shift the D to copy that. I'm going to do this unprocedurally by just convert that into a curve object. So there is one issue that you need to realize: there is a lot of vertices. We will deal with this later, but currently I will just let it be here. So within the noding, the curve object cannot hold any geometry modifier. So the only thing that can hold the geometry modifier is the vertices. So let's create a gem holder. We do not need any mesh because either way we're going to delete all the mesh. So within the noding, let's go to Geometry Nodes Editor. Let's add a new node tree. This is a new feature in Geometry Nodes that you hit this button, so you add a new node tree. Previously it's undoable, so you have to go to Geometry Nodes. Okay. So once we have done this, we just not going to use the geometry. So here what we do is to add a grid. So you add a grid and 15, 15. Actually started with a low number will be more feasible, I think. And let's just point instance. point instance or knitting unit, and immediately you see kind of instance being generated. You realize our knitting unit is too large. You can either scale this down in this new place, or you can scale that down using other place. I don't know. But definitely this point instance seems different from the field, from the original design, because everything now contains the field prototype. Okay, we will go more detail later, just whatever. So we have this knitting being instanced, and you can increase the count. This is kind of procedural. I hope they provide more options about the grids, like more like using the steppings of the vertices. But anyway, okay. Now this is not easy to visualize. I'm not sure if you can actually see that on the screen properly or not. So to make your life better, I'm going to make some thickness of all this kind of spline. To know that the reason I started with a curve object is because you can use curve to mesh. Also to realize there is a node which is called a mesh to curve. So previously I do the converting step non-procedurally, that's why I created a copy of the mesh. But you can do that definitely more procedurally. But anyway, it's just a thing you can know. So once we use the curve to mesh nodes, take the object info, you need to input a new curve geometry. So let's go to the curve and take a circle. And if you put these circles, it will make the screen looks horrible. So immediately let's go. It looks like this. What's this? Like a whole balls, whatever stuff. The reason it happens is because basically what we are doing is we're using this circle as a bevel object. The bevel object, where's the bevel object? Using the circle as the bevel object to make the thickness on this spline. So which actually means if we select edit mode and then decrease its thickness, then we're going to have a better view. So now we looks more kind of normal shape, but it's still kind of very thick. So there is definitely other ways like increase the size or other things. But here is another thing that which is very important, as we will discuss later, which is the radius of this object. So we take the set radius. This is not fine. So here's I want to talk about one thing. Many people usually ask, how do you learn a node system? I think the very important step is to actually know what kind of nodes you have. Sometimes you just look at the menus. I think the name are very self-explanatory. Otherwise you just try. But like bounding box, just get a bounding box, convex solve. There's a material assign, just assign material. What else I need to explain? I don't need to make a tutorial just to talk about this material assign. You just read the dictionary, you get everything, right? So here, if I want to find the radius, does not find radius. Jesus Christ. So the field prototype definitely has been changed. So that's there is a, how should I say? I don't know. There is radius, yes, but I don't know how to change the radius. It does not give me option to math. Anyway, okay, fine. Let's just take a float. Take a radius. I'm going to do this old school method. Let's just take that to 0. So in this way, I'm going to decrease this factor. This is definitely dumb. I don't think this is how you should do this, but I do not find a way. How did I do this? Huh, interesting. I don't know. Store persistent attributes? Like if I hit M to disable this. I forgot to mention, but since this is a more kind of experimental tutorial, I didn't really prepare this. So you're working with me to build an animation with the prior knowledge of the geometry nodes. So yes, so now we get this radius. I think it does not really make a difference, but okay, all right, I take it. So now we have all these kind of units, which looks kind of cool, but this is, you can tweak more, like the size, the scale, like the 0.1, and distribution, more knitting, or more other things. Another important thing is actually that this kind of knitting should actually be distributed more kind of honeycomb-like. So not instead of a grid, which is like this, but more like a kind of this and this and this, so that the kind of lines can intersect to each other. This is the part which you can use other node system like animation nodes or or how should I say? Yes, like animation nodes or sword chalk, which will make this better. But I don't think I will try right now on this setup. So now we completed the most basic setup. We're going to start to do the animation. To know that in the past I've made a lot of presets in Blender 2.93 in geometry nodes, so that we can do motion graphics in geometry nodes a lot more easier. But in this case, since the field prototype does not do the versioning, we cannot directly do this. So here, I think I'm going to construct everything from scratch, and I think it will just be fine. So here, let's just do the position. So this is a change of field prototype. I don't want to explain field prototype as too complex, but usually you might think, hey, this is field prototype looks more intuitive, easier, but actually the internal building and the internal working logic is more complex and abstract than you think. This is the tricky part. For example, usually I think we get a position using the attribute separate XYZ or attribute field or whatever other stuff. But now you only have this position node. The question is, when we talk about position, you know that it's the position of vertices or this kind of points. But when I only have this single position, how do I know if this position comes from before the instance in which we have a grid, or after the instance we have more points, or after this curve to mesh node we have more points? It does not tell you this information because it's not connected to the geometry anywhere. There is not even an input that tells you, oh, I need to put the geometry into. So this is the interesting part of field prototype. This is a very unique system. Usually we read the node trees from left to right, so that we know, okay, I'm curved to mesh for the geometry on this particular part, in which I already changed the radius. If I change the radius after, it probably not change anything, because the so basically what I'm saying is that the hierarchy of node tree doesn't matter. And it's usually written, it's usually being read in terms of the left to right fashion. But for field, it's a little bit different. We will discuss this further later. In this case, I'm just going to separate XYZ. So in the past, this is also an interesting part. In the past, if we need to separate XYZ for the position attribute, we need to use a node which is called attribute separate. We no longer have this node because now with this field prototype, we can use all these shader nodes to do the original function, which is better to eliminate a kind of unnecessary nodes. Next thing is I'm going to take the object info and I'm going to just take an empty. So this is just an empty, and I take this as an arrow. I think I'm going to use the x-axis, but you can freely change whatever stuff. And here I'm going to take another math node, and I'm going to take this subtract location of our empties, and obviously you need to separate XYZ as well. So if it's x, to make it really into a preset, you definitely need to take a lot of switch nodes, so that you need to deal with if I'm using the X, if I'm using the Y, if I'm using the Z. But in this case, I'm just going to do a simple XX transformation. Okay. Once we get this subtract, we're getting the value done, and I'm going to take a map range. So there is also a node which is called attribute map range. I don't think these nodes should exist because most of the stuff can be replaced by shader nodes nowadays. But I'm not 100% sure yet at this stage. So the maximum, I'm going to clamp this value, and I think this is okay. But now there is one issue that we created the internal node tree without the relationship to this green socket, which is called a geometry. So how can we actually connect them together? I don't know. I think I'm going to use the point translate. So here, if I'm adding the translations up, then everything move upwards. There is no such kind of a selection being determined. But can we actually put these results into the selection? So that's only, yeah, so now it works. So basically, the concept of the fourth, by the way, this also comes to another. We call this proposal as a field. I don't like this name. And I don't think Jake's like this name as well. But I don't know how to come up with these names at the first place, because this makes no sense. As a person who came from Cinema 4D, field definitely equals to fourth. But our field definitely has nothing to do with the fourth. This is fourth, okay? So this part is fourth. I don't want to explain this further. But basically, a fourth is a mask to determine, like right now I'm using a directional mask, like only the point, which is larger than my x of the empty, will be selected to have this translation. So this is how it works. But this, I don't want to like this called field prototype. I will probably call it a contextual prototype. Previously we have mentioned a fact that we know this position, but we don't know how this position is being loaded. Like, does it the load position of this grid or this point instance, or does it load the position after we curve to mesh? Obviously now since everything has been switched, we can see it's being done after this curve to mesh process. But why? The reason is that the position is connected to geometry, which only after it has been done curve to mesh. So this is the tricky part. Usually we read node trees from left to right. This is obvious rules. Sometimes you might have different branches, but for the field prototype, it's very complex and abstract that you do not only read from left to right, but you also go backwards. So this is the tricky part. Because otherwise, if I do not do this curve to mesh, maybe I translate maybe at how should I say? Let's translate at this position step. Then it definitely causes things completely different because the position evaluation becomes different. So there's lots of interesting things that you need to consider. But I don't think you need to really worry if you do not understand. It's fine. Okay. A thing I realized is if I do this curve to mesh, there's so many vertices I need to work because there's so many vertices on this spline. So here what we do is I'm going to put this curve to a point to translate a little bit earlier and then put that to selection. Yes, so we get the same results, but this time ideally I think it should be a little bit faster. Does it? A personal concern with the field prototype is actually the performance, because I feel like this performance is a little bit heavy compared to the original 3.0 alpha. Obviously I'm running a bad laptop, but I don't think it should work this badly. Anyway, another thing actually I forgot to mention is that previously we have the gen holder, and this our object stays a function as the, how should I say? I don't know. as a function, as a bevel object. So if we look at our geom holder, and if you go to the shader, the vertices view, you can see all these kind of points are very dense. So in order to eliminate all this kind of axis calculation, I'm going to use the resample curve to decrease the vertices. So now you see it becomes less dark. So I'm going to take it at like 8. So if I zoom out, it looks like as smooth as a circle, but it's actually less dense, and our viewport should lag less, ideally speaking. So let's just try. Yeah, now it looks much faster. So this is also a thing that you can potentially do with our original curve. Just try to deal with this. Okay, so now we have our fourth, which is actually termed selection at this moment, and we're doing this stupid whatever stuff. So here we can make these translations like in other places. We can also invert the translation, like take the map range from 1 to 0. So now it looks different. But probably still 1 to 0. You can tweak a lot more stuff in your free time, but in this place, I think I will just do this like this. Okay. So now this is kind of animation that we have, and this is definitely not very interesting yet. So next step I think I'm going to do is to add a little bit more noise to this turbulence. Otherwise, it just looks kind of straight, or just kind of object changing. Another thing, actually, this is not good to add this selection, because the selection is a boolean, so you only have yes or no. So this animation is very sharp, like you have this sharp, long, stupid, whatever stuff here, which just looks ugly. I want more kind of a fade off of this kind of effect. So I'm not going to use the selection. No, I'm not going to use the selection anymore. I'm going to use the combine vector, combine XYZ, and I'm going to copy whatever I have here. And here I'm going to use the vector math and using the scale. So purple goes to purple, gray goes to gray. And the purple goes to purple. So now I have the same effect, but it looks kind of smoother. You can definitely change the value to make it sharper or other things. Here, to change it sharper or not, there are two ways. One is to use the curve, RGB curve, like more fade off, make it sharper. Or there's another way that you can potentially do, is to use the color ramp. Both ways are essentially the same. It just depends on how you manipulate it. Okay, so now we have this part. Let's just take this. Actually, you can see the interesting part of the field prototype, that we are actually branching off the node tree. Otherwise, originally it's just the attributes, which will make the since the geometry has to be linked with geometry, the node tree will be extremely linear. So instead of having this branching, which is good at this moment. So as I said previously, the next step is to add a little bit of noise in this animation. Otherwise, it looks kind of boring, dumb. So add a noise is kind of very simple. Again, let's add a point translate. Because you realize actually we only make the thickness after this kind of curve to mesh. So we change whatever. It would be better if we change whatever things before, so that we have less vertices to work with. Okay. So here, what we do is, in this point translate, is we add a little bit of noise. You can actually add, so you can, originally in 2.0 I used the attribute sample texture, but because since we are using this field prototype, I think we can do all this kind of mess within the shader nodes instead of using the attribute nodes. So I'm going to use the noise texture. I believe that in the future more texture will be added, like Musgrave or other things. I actually do not like noise texture, but anyway. And the noise texture, if we just directly, I think let's just add this. Directly add instead of using point translate. Then we immediately add all this kind of noise. And we do realize the issue of this factor. Here's another issue with the prototype yet, is that you do not know the value of the original factor. Can we actually use a viewer to actually view? Yeah, that does not receive anything other than geometry, completely BS. So I don't know if it will be changed in the future or not, but anyway. So here, if you would like to have more randomness, you just use color instead. This is the same as if you're using 3.0, current 3.0 alpha. That's you add a texture and you add a clouds, which is similar kind of noise. And you realize as grayscale is the same as the factor, how can I actually get a color? You just change that to color. Then everything will just be better. Anyway, but this does not really matter. So we get a color and we get all this kind of thing. But I do not want to have noise plastered everywhere. So here, how should I actually do this? I think it related to our color ramp. So just to notice, I suppose you already know, but this part, let's hit Ctrl J to add a frame and hit F2. This part is basically our fold. So I only want this fold applied to it. How should I say? Only want this noise applied to the area that's covered by this fold or the mask. So here, there's basically several ways, I guess. You take the adds before the multiply. I think this is a way you can do that. Yeah, I think this is one way that you can do that. Or you just do more nodes, like one, like a how should I say? Like a scale again using the fold. I think essentially they're the same. And you can increase the noise or decrease the noise. But just to know this, how should I say? The color scale is always from 0 to 1, 0 to 1, 0 to 1. I think this is how it works. So if you would like to really increase the amplitude, you should not use the scale. Using the scale only means you get more details. Decrease the scale, it means more broad, more wave-like whatever stuff. But I think in reality, what you need to do if you would like to increase the amplitude is like just using the scale. But I realize the problem. Why it's going that direction? Oh yeah. If it goes to that direction, you need to realize there is a problem. Then what's the problem? Why is it happens? The reason is when we have a, how should I say, if we have all these kind of objects and we get a displacement modifier, let's say, where is my displacement? You always see there's a mid-level. And this is the part that's attribute sample texture and the noise texture is missing. It does not provide you mid-level, so you have to do that by yourself. So let's, very easy, let's just minus 0.5. So now you enable that. So now you have more kind of normal noise, and we can start to scale that up. It still goes to that way. Okay, I do not know how to fix this actually. But it looks okay actually. Yeah, it looks okay. So just to know that if it really goes to a particular direction, especially in like that quadrant, it means something is wrong with your setup. This is, you need to be cautious. Like now, this kind of points goes to that place, goes to that place, goes to that place. As long as they become completely random, it's correct. See, if I'm increase the, but if you increase the scale, it always only goes to a particular direction. It must be more. Okay, so this is the mid level. So let's decrease the scale just a little bit. So once we have this turbulent. Okay. So now we completed basically everything. Just to take these combines values. Phew. The final step that we're going to do is to make this point disappear. Because now it's just a shift. It looks interesting, but just kind of dumb. So we're going to change this kind of whatever stuff. And this is also very, very easy to do. You just change the radius. Previously we already mentioned that the radius is being, the thickness is controlled by the radius and our thickness curve. Okay. But in this case you just change the radius. Okay. So to change the radius, very, very simple. Just take this, let's say, take the math. Let's say 0.1 multiplied by this color ramp. And you still have this, yes. Okay. This now definitely contains a issue that's, it only occurs, it only shows up after the for has been run. So I think I'm going to invert this. So let's just create another color ramp. I'm going to make the, where's that? Okay. I'm going to invert the color ramp. Another thing is I think this is higher. Yes. So I think, and you can definitely change deal with this color ramp so that make the animations whatever. I think this is it. You can use the cardinal as well. I think this is roughly the idea. The next issue is only to just increase all this kind of vertices and size counts and modify your knitting units or make it better animation, whatever stuff. Finally, let's just modify this a little bit. I'm going to increase the count. The reason, because this animation can be definitely done within animation nodes. The reason I choose the geometry nodes earlier is because I see the advantage of this performance. I think the language coded doesn't matter because animation nodes, everything most of the time is Python, which is good, but it's sometimes slow. But in geometry nodes, sometimes it's better. So now we have all this kind of knitting appearance and the disappearance, which looks kind of good. I would like to, so it might look ugly if you have low amount of objects, but I do recommend you to start with low amount to get a kind of basic idea and then to deal with the more complex objects. And once you increase the amount of object, it definitely makes it beautiful. And you can definitely change the axis of evaluation, like a Y to Y evaluation instead of X. So you can take the Y. Just to know that if you take the Y, you also need to change the 0.7 whatever. Okay. So these are kind of things, just just try to play around by yourself. This is pretty simple. Just a little, yeah, I think this looks interesting. Looks pretty cool. Yes, it looks pretty cool. I don't know, it looks kind of hairy, whatever stuff. And you can change all this kind of coloring. I think generally speaking, the field prototype is easy to work with. Or it looks kind of beautiful. Because you have those kind of branch of node tree instead of having a linear node tree. So definitely it improves more. Another thing is, instead of having two sets of nodes all the time, like attribute nodes are separate, like attribute separate XYZ and attribute combine XYZ, you have only one single node to do this function, which is very, very good. So I would like to talk a little bit about the honeycomb geometry, because currently we do not have honeycomb geometry. If I shift A goes to primitive, this is the only options. But in animation nodes, let's just take the animation nodes. Or SwirlChalk, we can directly generate all this kind of hexagon grid. I think I'm going to use the SwirlChalk. Do I have the SwirlChalk? Yes. Let's just take hexagon. The shift hexagon polygon grid, and take the viewer, mesh viewer, hit these. So I'm having this hexagon grid, which is very large. I think I'm going to decrease the size. So I'm going to decrease the size 0.05. So, and I'm going to hit the geometry. Add the geometry nodes modifier and use the original geometry. So immediately we're creating the same object. But so this is the SwirlChalk generated object, which is called alpha. And now because our node tree is like this, which is not using the original geometry, but if we're using the original geometry, we can see the difference about how this knitting being done. Because it's not distributed on a grid, but on a honeycomb. So you can see this kind of knitting being instanced on each other. And you can definitely increase the count like the 50 and 50. So you can see the kind of knitting are interlaced to each other. And you can play around it, because I think it will look more beautiful. Kind of, yeah, everything wired together, more interesting, more fun, and more dense it is, more beautiful it looks. 0.3. Yes, I think this looks nice. And yes. So I think this is nice, but definitely the issue is the performance, because you're dealing with so many of curve, meshes, whatever stuff. So this is really all about it. You can definitely tweak by yourself to make it more interesting. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I'll probably see you next time. Bye bye.